Everyone, welcome back to the channel Sociology Unboxed. Today, under the series Reinventing Indian Sociology, we are talking to Professor Tulsi Patel, a well known name in the field of sociology, who doesn't need introduction, but a little about Professor Tulsi Patel. Professor Patel has been a former professor, Delhi School of Economics. Before that, she has taught at Jamia Millia Islamia and Miranda House, University of Delhi. She has been rotating chair India Studies at Heidelberg University, Germany between 2005 to 2006. She has been honorary research associate at the Department of Sociology, Manchester University between 2001 and 2004. She has taken a few teaching assignments also, like she taught at London School of Economics and Royal Holloway College of the University of London. Some of her books, which are quite known, and I have read these books a lot, and recently also I was reading the book, and the name of the book is Sex Selective Abortion in India, that has been published by Sage, and Cognitive Behavior, that has been published by Oxford University Press. She has also been Secretary, Indian Sociological Society. So, welcome to the channel, ma'am. To the channel Sociology Unboxed, and we'll start with on your academic journey, how sociology, how you joined the discipline of sociology, what was of interest behind this decision, and your academic journey so far.
Good evening, Professor Prasad. Thank you so much for asking me to speak about sociology and about myself and my journey in sociology. Seems very interesting at the moment. To recall my journey in sociology, I would say that I came from a family which was in many ways very closely related to the village life. So, a lot of village people would could come in, drop in, and stay with us and go back to the village. A lot of what was happening in the village would keep dropping into my ears. And after my school, of course, at that time there was no sociology in school, but after my school, when it came to joining some courses in BA, I was born and brought up in Jodhpur, which is in Rajasthan, and I did my master's from Jodhpur University itself. So when I joined college, we were about 3 or 4 girls from the school who had English medium, and the teaching was happening in Hindi medium. So because the other friends had also decided to join sociology, the whole group, the 3-4 of us, went into sociology. And this was taught in a college in Jodhpur University, which was the women's college. And by chance, there was a professor in social anthropology who had studied under Leela Dubey and S.C. Dubey in Sagar, was deputed to teach in this girls' college, which was mostly taught by women, but this was a change. And somehow the influence of that professor was so much on my mind, and his teaching appealed to me so much that I memorized Madan and Majumdar's Anthropology and Introduction. I knew the book backwards. I could remember everything, and I was very much interested in whatever was mentioned in that book. And that left a good impression on the teachers. I scored very well in sociology compared to other subjects that I had opted for. And that decided that I'll do my master's. But in between, I had to drop because I was married while I was in school. I did my class 11 after marriage, and then I did my BA after marriage, and then dropped again because I had a second child, and then joined my MA. So a lot of contribution in my studies is from my home where I was brought up, from my teachers, and from my family on both sides, parents as well as in-laws. So there was a lot of contribution by them, which made me do sociology masters, and I attained a gold medal in the university. And then I joined PhD in Jodhpur University, but very soon I got a chance to teach in Miranda House. This was not a permanent job, it was a leave vacancy job, and I joined because there was the World Anthropological Congress in 1978. I wanted to go to the World Congress, and there was an incentive to go for this interview. So because of that, I could leave Jodhpur and go to Delhi. Just for the conference, I don't think I would have got permission. So I went to the conference. One day before the conference was this interview. And after the interview, I was told, don't leave, stay for a minute. And then the principal came out and said, you're on the top of the list, can you join tomorrow? And I had gone not for teaching, but I had gone for the conference. So I said, I'll have to ask my in-laws, I don't know if I can join. So the principal was very strict and she said, I'll give you a week. Next week, within 7 days, if you're here, you join, otherwise the job is gone. I said, okay. And then next day I went to the conference and my supervisor told me, what are you doing here? Go home, ask your father-in-law and then come back and teach. You have a job and you are here, you should be leaving. So that very day I left for Jodhpur, sought permission and I was allowed to teach. That's how my career in teaching began. I had taught for a month and a little bit in Bharatpur because at that time there was a program or a policy that all the toppers in Rajasthan universities in subjects which they take, if you are a topper, then you are automatically given an appointment letter to go and teach. So I did teach in Bharatpur, but children were small and I don't think I could have done my PhD and teaching together. So I decided to leave and then I got a chance in Miranda House. So my PhD was of course on the back burner. I was not doing PhD, I was teaching and it was very different atmosphere teaching in Miranda House coming from Jodhpur. A lot of books were new for me and I had to really struggle a lot to be able to teach. But I can say that my colleagues were so cooperative and so kind that I was learning as well as teaching. Generally, we all learn in our initial days and we learn our subjects much better while teaching than while studying. So I was in many ways gaining a lot of academic input into my system, into my mind, in more than one ways, coming from different colleagues, coming from students, coming from library, coming from my own efforts. So it was in many ways a real flowering of my subject in my mind. That also made me decide that I should stay in Delhi and not move out. The academic atmosphere was very, very stimulating. And then I got a chance to teach in Jamia, which was a permanent job. And gradually the family got together. I got my children from Jodhpur to Delhi and my husband transferred from Punjab to Delhi and we started living as a family on the one side. But Jamia was another opening. The syllabus was somewhat different from Delhi University. The head of the department, Dr. Sayed, was from Wisconsin University. So the influence of American sociology on the Jamia syllabus was much more than the impact of social anthropology in Delhi University. So again, the challenge was very different. I had to deal with that. But what happened in these processes was that my mind really opened a great deal more through various kinds of teaching. And I also did my MPhil and PhD from Delhi University. And after teaching for 16, 17 years in Jamia, I got a chance to shift to Delhi University, Department of Sociology at Delhi School of Economics. And again, it was going back to a new kind of emphasis in the syllabus and new kinds of teaching mode that was happening. In Jamia, it was composite. We did BA as well as MA teaching. And here it was mostly MA teaching and postgraduate teaching, MA, MPhil and PhD. And of course, It was far more stimulating in the sense that it was a more organized kind of plan for teaching, research, and research activities, regular weekly seminars, etc. All was happening. So that enabled me to do a lot of research and gave me a lot more opportunities to do research. My book was already from Oxford University, was already published when I joined Delhi University, but then I could do some more reading and writing later on. And it enabled me to explore areas which I had not earlier explored. And these were interrelated in the sense that if I worked on anthropological demography in the initial stages, I could work on gender later, because when we talk about population and fertility, gender cannot be ignored. It is so important to look at gender. And because it was in many ways the first anthropological village study in population, in demography. So the anthropological demography came up very naturally in that. And also because it was a micro study done based on field work. And once Oxford University published it, it was recognized, as mostly happens in academia, that once a good publisher publishes your book, you are acknowledged by people around. Otherwise, you are a nobody. So from a nobody, I became somebody with this book. And then, as you mentioned, that the sex selective abortion book, that came much later compared to the earlier one. And that pushed me into looking at health and issues related to not just reproductive health, but issues related in medical sociology. So I also have done some work on in the field of medical sociology, reproductive health. So the sex selective abortion book is not just on gender, but it also looks at health and medical issues related to women's lives. And from there, looking at the broader spectrum of how policy, town planning, city planning, and medicine, healthcare, public health is related to each other. So, in that sense, it is a spread of very intricately related issues in the field of sociology, but not just one kind of study, which is just fertility studies. So I'm not an expert in fertility studies, but I think I can see how fertility is not just a matter of one-time decision. It's a matter that integrates family, that integrates community. And now if we see, it is so important over even if we look at just Indian history, the way population has been dealt with and the changes that have been brought in, the manner in which emphasis is given on fertility, reproduction, women's health, reproductive health, etc. And also now in terms of communities and population. So it's not just Rockefeller Foundation or United Nations or USAID, etc. that decide about population, or the Pope who decides about population, but population is something which engrosses so many people's minds. So many political establishments deal with questions of population and make decisions. So it is a politically also very important issue that I have, with my Manchester colleagues, written about. So that's my journey. Now, of course, I'm retired.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Very inspiring journey indeed, and packed with sociological insights. Now I leave it to the audience to deliberate upon about, in fact, your academic journey and the points and how they can get inspired by your academic journey. We cannot be excused because of getting married and then having two children and then getting gold medal. Very very inspiring, ma'am. Entire journey has been very inspiring, and I'm sure it is going to inspire those in similar situations and others as well. So moving forward, ma'am, as you know, sociology in India has completed little more than 100 years, and there are many issues, especially we talk about the indigenization of the discipline, and there are many other issues. So, how do you see the journey of sociology in India and the current state of Indian sociology?
Looking at the journey of sociology in India, there are a lot many articles which are written by different people that speak about the journey of sociology in India over these 100 years. More number of articles, starting with Srinivas and Panini, are on the early part of the development of sociology in India. But I would rather not emphasize so much on those articles which talk about the history of sociology, different departments in South India, in North India, in Eastern and Western India have come up over these years, and the teaching of sociology in India since independence has actually grown and flourished a lot compared to the past. But pre-independence departments were also very critically and interestingly conducting studies and speaking about issues that pertain to society, like the Lucknow School, the Bombay School, Mysore Sociology Department. So some of these were really outstanding and contributed a lot in terms of large surveys, in terms of how sociology was related. For instance, how economics and sociology are related, how politics and sociology are related. So it wasn't just a very narrow view of sociology, but something much more than a limited scope. So sociology was actually expanding in many ways, and also intensive work was happening in terms of a reflection of what society was doing and where are we heading towards. So it was in many ways a philosophical approach to sociology and to society. This is also happening while India is under the colonial rule, and there are a lot of struggles towards becoming a nation, becoming independent, and coming out of colonial impact. So over time, there were studies which impacted the kind of sociology that was done. A lot of sociology was still not field-based, but study that was done more in a philosophical sense, but also in terms of Indology. So Indology had a lot more influence in the initial stages of sociology and its development, particularly the Bombay School. Patrick Geddes was not an Indologist, but he set up the department. And then you have Ghurye, who is known as an Indologist, and he was really a person who did a lot of Indological work and encouraged his students to do. But he was in many ways more liberal in not just restricting his students to Indological work, but enabled them to also do field work and empirical work. So sociology did not remain as an armchair subject, but it was moving towards empirical research. And this is the time that India is getting close to independence, and particularly after independence, the government established a lot of sociology departments, and the fervor at that time, the zeal in the departments of sociology at that time, and in many other departments, including science departments, economics, political science, the emphasis largely was on how to make this country, which was just becoming independent or had just become independent, how does this newly independent country move further towards development? And the idea of development after World War II had already gripped a lot of academia, both in social sciences as well as in the natural sciences. So you will find most of the people at that time were in many ways dedicated to contributing their effort in their own subject towards making the country great, towards making the country developed from a poverty-ridden country. So if you look at life expectancy at that time, look at health at that time, look at education at that time. So literacy rate, life expectancy rate, etc., maternal mortality rate, many of these statistical figures would tell us that when the British left, we had very little to show by way of a developed society. And how there was this feeling in most of the departments in social sciences and also in sciences that how do we contribute to the society? And here the emphasis was on doing a very honest examination of the surroundings of what was happening in society and reporting that so that policymakers would get correct information about what status we are in and what policies should be implemented or designed for the people. In this emphasis, of course, economics took a lead and they were able to influence the policies far more than sociologists. And also, perhaps sociologists were so engrossed in the study of society, both in Indology as well as in empirical research at that time, that they were not so close to policymakers. For instance, Srinivas, I came to know only through his wife's second book, which has just come out. And there she mentions of how he was moving away and not getting near the politicians because he didn't want to become the second education minister. So if Srinivas was interested in participating in policy making rather than just informing policymakers through his research, he would have been our second education minister. I got to know this only about a week ago when I was reading this book. I did not know about it. But in whatever may be the reason, but sociology was not so close to policy making as economics. But sociology was committed to providing honest and correct information through its studies. Now, this phase led to establishment of several departments all over the country. And the interesting part is that these departments had both English as well as Hindi. The Hindi area had Hindi medium as the instruction, and the other areas or the cosmopolitan areas had English as the medium of instruction. Most of the books were either available in Hindi areas, Hindi speaking areas, and in English. But everybody who was doing sociology at that time, in the 50s and early 60s, knew that books in sociology are coming from English language, and those are better books, or they give you more information. In many ways, they gave us more information because some of the books were coming from West, and French translations of Durkheim, German translations of Weber and Marx, etc. were available. Excuse me. So that kind of divide was there, the Hindi medium and the English medium. But that divide was not a divide of any kind of class categorization or hierarchy. It was just how the regional languages influenced its subject of sociology. A lot of good research came out. The shift from Indology to empirical work was there, and the emphasis on development was very clear. In terms of teaching and research, the differences were that some departments were focused on original readings, original documents to be read, and other departments were focused on commentaries of various scholars. The influence of the West was far more on sociology and many other social sciences than on languages and in sciences. The impact on sciences, I do not have the expertise to speak about, but in social sciences, the impact of the Western production of knowledge was far greater than on the indigenous material that was available. So that bias influenced our students and our departments to a great extent. In some ways, the Lucknow school still had given some emphasis to the Indian thinkers and philosophers. But when it came to research, the kind of teaching for research that was conducted all over the country was on the empirical side. But the empirical research focus was over time split into two parts. Split in the sense that the practice of research was such that some places focused on empirical research, which was more ethnographic in nature. Other departments focused more on survey research. And this might have happened because in the West, sociology was seen very differently from social anthropology. While in India, even if it was called sociology and not social anthropology, it was actually social anthropology that was being done. So, social anthropology and sociology, when it came to India, became overlapping. But when it was in the Western context, sociology departments were very different from social anthropology departments. So sociology departments focused on large-scale surveys and quantitative analysis, while social anthropology departments focused on other cultures, studies of other cultures. So a lot of people from the colonies and from the colonizers, scholars went to understand the colonies, and all of them would go and learn the language, stay there over a long period of time, understand the culture of that place, and then write an ethnography about the place. So, empirical work, long time stay, monographs, and that became very different from the Indological work. So, sociology shifted from Indology to empirical work, and within empirical, it branched into survey research, large-scale surveys, and micro-studies. With micro-studies, the emphasis was based on fieldwork and participant observation. This participant observation and fieldwork brought out a lot of ethnographic studies, but over time, these ethnographic studies became rarer and rarer in sociology, and there was sort of a race for lot more PhDs and completing a PhD as soon as possible. And the phenomenon which most of the teachers in sociology would bear me out is that students after MA or MPhil, they are not clear about what they want to study, what is their question. They come to the teacher and say, please tell me what should I work on, what should be my topic for research, what should be my question for research. This kind of did not push the students to think about their own topic. So the teachers would provide them topics, and in that sense, there was a set pattern like the Bombay formula or Bollywood formula. You had a sociology formula. So you decided 300 people or 400 people, you had a questionnaire, and the questionnaire would be administered or not administered or administered by somebody else. There are shades and shades of things which happen from one department to the other, one student to the other, one teacher to the other. But these have been the very set patterns. So you decide each department has a pattern, and some departments would emphasize more on 400 sample, others on 300 as a sample, etc. But I'm not very sure how helpful this kind of survey research has been, because some departments have emphasized on quantitative analysis based on survey research. The spread of that survey research across interconnections linked to that subject are not very encouraging, but at least some quantitative work is done. While in many other cases of students who conduct PhDs or submit their PhDs, even that much is not found. So there is very elementary kind of statistical analysis done, and in terms of in-depth data, there is a scarcity of that in survey research. Very, very few and increasingly fewer focus on ethnographic research. Ethnographic research based on fieldwork is very difficult. Now, because Borovay has just left us unfortunately in that accident very recently. I am recalling his study on the copper mines in Zimbabwe and how from the London market, which decides about metals and prices of metals, to the mines in Zimbabwe, to how the copper is circulated all over the world, who manages it. I mean, he has been to shop floors and talks about the extended case study method. So, in terms of methodology, I think the focus in sociology in many ways has to be revisited, and we should look within ourselves as to what we are doing and what kind of sociology are we providing to our students. What kind of methodology are we making them work for? And that awareness that you have to be very honest, your research integrity has to be intact, and you should be willing to devote that much time in the field and pick up things from the field, because field work in many ways is a very tough job. It's more like more than 18 hours of job. You be in the field, and the danger is after some time you stop receiving data because you're so used to it. So all the time you have to keep writing about the research, about the data. You cannot just be there and not make notes every day. Every single day you need to make notes. Now some of these things are very useful to be provided to students. Otherwise, it can lead to a lot more easier way out to conduct a research, to submit a PhD and get a degree. And then it goes from one generation to the other, one teacher to the student, and then from that student to the next generation of students. And the subject can technically be very productive. A lot of PhDs coming out from departments. But I think the sociological sensibility of how sensitive you are to what are the values, what are the perspectives, what are the relationships, what are the feelings, thoughts of people is very important to notice, along with what they do, what is their behavior, and what do they say and what do they mean by saying what they mean or what they speak. So this relationship between saying and meaning, I mean, are sociology students sensitive to it? Are they looking for things like that? Like one of the scholars from Finland has talked about filling the stomach of children. So when you say बच्चों का पेट भरना है, it doesn't mean literally बच्चों का पेट भरना. It means so much more. And our students who know the meaning of this, who know the interpretation, who know the larger context of such a phrase, are they sensitive to it that when somebody says, I don't want many daughters because दहेज देना पड़ता है. It's not just दहेज. It means so much more than this. So that sensibility, is it generated in students? Are students able to receive it? Are they able to appreciate it and translate it into the research? So that I think is something which we need to focus on in the way the research is done. And that would enable us to look at the values of the Indian system, of the Indian society, and relate it to our research topics. So that would be a great service if that is introduced and focused and stressed for our students and for us.
So very thank you. In fact, I was totally engrossed into what you were saying, and the journey, distinct stages of journey in India. You very beautifully highlighted all those things. Not only the stages. Somewhere, when we say the word is stage, it means that level up. But you integrated it all in a very beautiful way, talking about sociological sensibilities and call of the country, how sociology could contribute, and many other things. So thank you very much. Moving forward, may I ask you to highlight some of the challenges that the discipline of sociology is facing today, according to you?
I would take this question in a slightly historical way. Let's see how sociology developed. Out of philosophy, we all teach our students that it is from social philosophy that sociology developed. But if we look at historically and find a juncture for sociology and its emergence, then the emergence of sociology is generally related to the Industrial Revolution, which brought about such drastic and sudden changes in the society that it was important to leave social philosophy or armchair theory and merge into or jump into society and see what were the problems. So that is the historical context of emergence of sociology. Sociology has emerged later, not just Industrial Revolution, but also French Revolution, World Wars, and then the question of development of the world, then the critique of development, and now we of course come to more critical issues of environment, ecology, etc. Now, these are all challenges that sociology has encountered. And we have seen how within sociology also the subject matter has been evolving according to the changes that the society world over is encountering. If you look at the readings or writings of earlier scholars, you would find how there is absence of the word woman. Gender is not even mentioned. And when you say mankind, the womankind is included in it or implied. And then you have the 60s, post-World War II, development on the one side, but how women in the Western societies, particularly Europe, decided not to go back home to manage the home, but because they were brought out to manage the economy, they refused. After First World War, they went back home. After Second World War, even if the white race had the focus of being able to produce more children, because so many people were lost in Second World War, they produced more children. So this was also a period of baby boom. But along with that, they manned the economy. They did not go back home. And that changed the whole world. And then you find the second wave of feminist movement in the 60s and 70s, which spread all over the world. And you have a number of researches done in Africa, Asia, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, which told us that the amount of work women do, the amount of contribution that women have in the family, outside the family, for children, for the society, to even raise civilized human beings for the state, is the women have a lot more contribution, not just in terms of hours that they contribute. So female labor force participation on the one hand, how national income accounts are made, how women's work is not included as economic work, and yet so much contribution is done by women. These studies brought not just the feminist movement from the roads, but it brought the feminist movement from the roads to the academia. And we have, if we look at the work after 70s and 80s, so many departments have had women's studies centers, and then exclusion studies of how development has not been uniform. It's been very differently spread, and advantages or disadvantages are not again uniform or not equal. So issues of inequality, issues of deprivation, issues of exclusion and inclusion are all taken up. And in our context, they are taken up in the sense of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and reservations. So it might be that studies of caste, of gender, of family, of fertility are issues which may be ignored as not very important issues or older issues, because now there is artificial intelligence and digital society. So in this digital age, anybody studying caste or anybody studying family is old, and it is not a fashionable subject or not a critical subject. It is no longer challenging. But I can tell you that most of the students in sociology still think of family in terms of joint family and nuclear family rather than looking at household. Whereas our census has constantly studied household. All through the census, the word is household, not the family. Are sociologists able to even make that distinction and make studies on family and household? So the family may be united even if part of the family is in America and part of the family is in India. There may be two households, but they are one family. Does it really catch the interest of people, and how do these relationships happen? In medical sociology now, doctors have told me that a child sitting in America makes an appointment for his or her mother or father who's ailing in India for a doctor who is in India. And then the person goes and meets the doctor. So this kind of relationship where some responsibilities are maintained even if it is long distance residence. So the issue of residence, inheritance, law, are they impacting relationships? How are they impacting relationships? So that would bring out how the Indian family is experiencing family relationships today. So there is enormous opportunity and enormous questions and issues that are available for students to study. But it so happens that there is some topic that becomes important and fashionable for some time, and most students want to or get attracted towards that. How do teachers make students develop this sense that what bothers you most, even if it has bothered you as a child or a young person or as an MA student or even just as you join a PhD, what has bothered you most? Do you want to study that? And do it honestly. I think the most important thing would be a very honest fieldwork done. The idea of doing a fieldwork, there is enormous amount of data that a lot of institutes, government as well as non-government institutes, are generating today. So from that data, which is the secondary source of data, from that secondary source of data, if you can relate that data with some of your own empirical fieldwork based data, it would enormously help you to move forward in sociology. And right from the beginning, sociology emerged because newer things were happening in society. Newer challenges had come, and people were encountering those challenges, and it was difficult to figure out how to deal with those challenges. Today also we are encountering challenges, and we are finding it difficult how to deal with challenges, given the unemployment, lower wages, the kind of policies that are being made for both poor and for the non-poor. How are these impacting us in the context of digital technology ruling the society, and now of course artificial intelligence taking over? So every phase in sociological development has encountered newer challenges and has attempted to study these newer challenges. So in many ways, we are facing another new challenge today. And I'm sure sociology will be able to deal with this new challenge as it has dealt with earlier. But the integrity and honesty of rigorous research and very good quality research and good quality teaching is required to produce mass scale students and produce mass scale PhDs. Without that rigor, without that honesty, without that integrity is the requirement today. Sociology can be very interesting. And I think today with not just lifestyle diseases, but today we have a lot of psychological and mental issues. And we need to understand this. Will AI and digital technology alone serve the society? Or do we need human relationships? Do we need closer relationships? Whether it is friendship, whether it is through marriage, whether it is through family and other relationships, friends. How do human touch, human relationships and something that can care for you, that can look after you, vis-a-vis running after money, vis-a-vis running after pay packages. So on the one hand, pay packages and struggle in education are important, but on the other, there are the other softer sensibilities and feelings that are also valuable. How are we going to integrate the two? And I think here sociology has a great potential, and we can deal with it if we are honest about our discipline.
So, again, very thoughtful of you, and while highlighting various challenges that the discipline has faced during various stages of its journey, one thing which catched my attention was we have to be honest, we have to be sincere to our discipline while conducting research, while teaching in classrooms. So, honesty and sincerity is going to solve all the challenges that we are facing as a discipline. So, how do you think we can reinvent Indian sociology?
I think just as all the challenges that society has thrown up to human beings, and sociologists, social scientists, not just sociologists but social scientists, have faced those challenges and dealt with those challenges. In the same way, I am hopeful that we can also deal with those challenges if we are sincere about that. And I think in this sense, we should make this distinction between a job and a profession, a job and calling. Are we devoted to our discipline? Are we sincere about it? And are we willing to devote time and effort to it? That promise to ourselves that yes, this is a challenge. But what is happening to people? So many suicides the number of suicides is increasing, number of mental issues are increasing today. The way in which the relationship between parents and children is changing, the way in which family is changing. Gender studies made us aware of the fact that there were exploitations. Young women in their conjugal homes were exploited, and we had periods when dowry deaths, etc. We have a history of that, and we have records of what is happening. The Crime Bureau reports show how much women are suffering and insecure in many ways. So, whether it is rapes or molestation or at work, at home, outside the home, I mean, the challenges are very much there, still very much there. And yet, within the families, there is a way in which the younger generation is changing. There are fewer children. Young daughters-in-law are now sort of threatening the in-laws, and they are a big challenge. It's only the minuscule number of cases, but you have a large number of cases where women are exploited, young women are more exploited than the older women, or mothers-in-law are pressurizing daughters-in-law in many ways. But now there are also daughters-in-law who are pressurizing mothers-in-law, and mothers-in-law are taking a back seat, or father-in-law and mother-in-law are both taking a back seat. So there are ways in which these kinds of complexities can be brought out. Why do people from European societies come and tell us that, see, look at your back doors, and you have young women pressurizing the mother-in-law or senior relatives in the family because there are laws which support them, and they misuse the laws. These laws may be misused only at a minuscule scale, but that is happening. And a European scholar comes here and notices that. So Filippo Osella and her partner talk about these issues, but we don't talk about these issues. So I think we can look at issues that are emerging, contemporary issues, whether it is AI, digital technology, international relations, migration, or family relationships. It is important that we challenge ourselves and take up these issues and bring up an honest picture of what is happening in Indian society or in any other society. It's not just Indian sociologists studying Indian society, but the Indian sociologists, like Europeans and others who have studied our society, we can also go and study their society and see what is happening. And I'm sure that will enable us to deal with our society and our problems in many bold ways. So I'm pretty hopeful, but the challenge is within us. We have to deal with it.
So thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with me and with us, in fact, the viewers of the channel Sociology Unboxed. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for this opportunity.